Hi guys, this is the video for question 2. Now, question 2 is a little bit different because it has a prompt here. Um, and there are a few different things I think you have to do in order to answer this question than you had to do the other one, in my opinion. The first is this really tests your reading ability, right? Can you read and understand what the main ideas of this document are? And what I found is in a lot of wrong answers people are not spending the necessary time inside this document, contextualizing it, looking at who wrote it, thinking about what time this is being written and how it fits into the overall time period, right? No one needs to see me. So let's just start with the passage. For me, when I do this, if it was me, if I'm taking the exam on you guys, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read the question. Right? I'm going to take a look at what's going on with this question. The first thing I notice is A, B, and C are all explained. That's probably not going to happen on an AP exam. Right? You're probably going to get describe, describe, explain, but in this case, it is explain. These are a little bit more complex because explain always means how and why, right? Secondly, I am looking at them to understand what the thinking skill is. Is this cause and effect? Is this continuity and or change? Is this comparison and contrast, right? So if we watch it, if we read these carefully, right, explain one way that the passage illustrates or is an example of a response to European colonialism. This is a cause and effect sort of question, right? How, what can you find of evidence in here that is a response where people are encountering European colonialism? And at this point, I don't know what's going on in this document, but how are they reacting to, right? If we think about what is a reaction to going to the doctors and getting a flu shot, a response to that might be a sore arm, right? Explain one way in which the circumstances, and this is going to get people in trouble when they do this. I'll come back to that in a second. The circumstances of the speech might have affected the author's argument in the passage, right? B and C are asking you to do something that many of you think you only have to do on DBQs, right? Which is to analyze the context, the audience, the purpose, or the point of view of the author, or the HAP, or whatever acronym I feel like using at this moment. Normally I use CAP POV, right? And in this case, the term circumstances to me are screaming context. What bigger picture is going on inside this speech, and how does that impact what the argument the author is making, right? It's not asking you to quote the document. It is asking you to understand what is going on at this time. Yeah, we'll get into that in a moment, right? Which is kind of, again, a cause and effect relationship, right? What are the larger processes going on, right? And how does that affect cause and effect? Explain one way in which the author's point of view is significant or important for illustrating how European ideologies influence the development of Indian society, right? So the idea that you're looking for here is this statement, right? This cause and effect statement. European ideologies influenced, impacted, affected how Indian society developed during the 19th century. Again, a cause and effect relationship. You're not looking, again, to quote this necessarily. You are looking to take the author's general point of view and explain how, why, right? It illustrates any European ideology. Now, a lot of the correct answers are focused towards one ideology, but the readers, for the most part, are looking not for one specific ideology, but the quality of the argument that you're making. Okay. The second thing I'm going to do now that I know what I have to look for is who's writing this, what time, place, right? Kind of source the document. Syed Ahmad Khan, Indian Muslim educator, right? So we know he is Indian, meaning he lives in India, but he is a Muslim, right? And again, reaching out into the larger context of the time, maybe you remember, oh, wait a second, India is a majority Hindu religion country and the Muslims were a minority. Right? He's an educator and a political reformer, which means that right, he is most likely well educated, right? He is trying to reform the political system, right? Which means he is not invested in the entrenched beliefs. He is trying to change whatever the existing system is, and he's giving this speech before fellow Muslims, right, in northern India, 1888, right during the key period of imperialism that this unit deals with. And 1888 might be important when we look at a couple of the correct answers to know where this fits in order. There's a couple of key dates here that you might want to think about. So now we go and read it. You don't want to obsess about minutia. You want to get the main idea or a sense of what the author is talking about. What is the author's main idea here, right? Now, suppose that all the English and the whole English army were to leave India, taking with them all their cannon and their splendid weapons and everything. Then who would be the rulers of India, right? So he is asking what's called a rhetorical question, right? If the English leave and take their means of control with them, who's in charge of India? Is it possible that under these circumstances, right, meaning that the English just get up and leave India, two nations, the Muslims and the Hindus, could sit on the same throne and remain equal in power? Most certainly not. Don't read this with a rhetorical argument. Don't read this too literally. There's not a throne of India that they are going to be pushing each other to sit in, like my dogs fight to sit in the chair by the window, right? This is metaphors. Okay? Basically, what he's saying is if the English get up and leave, right, who's going to be running India? And could the Muslims and Hindus work together? Right? Probably not, is his argument. So I would ask myself, what might he be arguing about that? The aims and the objects of the Indian National Congress are based upon an ignorance of history and present-day realities. Let's stop here. Okay. Sometimes, folks, knowing vocabulary terms comes in handy. A number of incorrect responses. Just saw the word Congress, some folks just exposed that they didn't go through the vocab. They didn't know what the Indian National Congress was. It's generally an organization made up primarily of Hindus, right, that are attempting to demonstrate to the British that they have the capacity for self-rule. They're trying to expand the role of the people of India, but again, predominantly Hindus, in the governing of India during this period when the British are really in charge. And he's saying that what they want is they don't understand history, nor do they understand the realities of today. Right? They do not take into consideration that India is inhabited by different nationalities. They presuppose that the various religions, castes, and ethnic groups of India can all be treated alike, and all of them belong to the same nation. Now, right, I kind of stop here because there's some things that you can think about generally. He is arguing that India is made up not only of different nationalities, but I think it's interesting that he points out different religions, castes, ethnic groups, right? And that the Indian National Congress believes that everybody should be treated equally, all alike. Now, thinking about C, we're going to come back to that quote, right? For the successful running of a democratic government, again, that might be helpful. Right? It is essential that the majority should have the ability to govern not only themselves, but also the unwilling minorities. Right? In other words, right, for a democracy to work, right, the majority has to govern itself, but has to work with people who might not agree, right? Whether we like in this country who gets elected president or not, we accept the fact that they are legitimate. Okay. I consider the experiment that the Indian National Congress wants to make fraught with dangers and sufferings for all the nationalities of India, but especially for the Muslims. The Congress cannot rationally prove its claim to represent the opinions, ideals, and aspirations of the Muslims. Right? So he makes it clear that he is opposed to whatever this democratic plan is to treat everybody equal that the Indian National Congress is apparently promoting. Right? And he feels that this is especially risky for Muslims. Right? So let's take a look at each question, what good responses look like, and what some incorrect responses look like. Okay. Again, we are looking, how is this passage a response to European colonialism or imperialism? Right? So we are looking for that connection between imperialism, colonialism, right, and how it impacts how, in this case, in this passage, he is responding. The first thing I want to point out, again, is you're not seeing quotes of the document, right? Do not quote the document at length. It will not score, right? You guys know I'm an SAQ table leader. When I tell you that quoting the document does not score a point, I can say that with absolute certainty. Right? Secondly, in the responses, I always say, always try to incorporate some vocabulary terms, right? Prove to the person who's reading it that you know something, right? Broad, sweeping generalities that use words like everything, thing, right? Take a look at a few of these, right? Lastly, before I forget, see if it'll do it, right? Look at the way they are using the stem of A to answer the question. Okay. I don't think you have to write the whole name, right? You could say the speech, you could say con speech illustrates, right? Or shows. So you are going back to this prompt and you're going to tell me how it answers the question. That some people in colonial societies welcomed European colonialism because it helped bring unity to colonial societies and maintain peace between different religions and ethnic groups. All right, maybe this is a little sophisticated in language and structure, right? But hopefully you can see up here that that's what's implied, right? Some people, in his case, I think we could logically infer from this paragraph that Khan might prefer, or some people might prefer, British rule because he feels that the British might be protecting the Muslim minority from an Indian majority rule. That's the argument. Notice he is not quoting them, he is summarizing the argument. One thing I want to point out too here is a lot of kids' responses and a lot of your writing. Right? I think a lot of you struggle to use words like some people, some groups, right? Not everybody is going to be in favor of everything. I say this a lot, folks. Everything is not black or white. What's good for some people might not be good for other people, right? And you have to identify, even in things that are bad, right? That some people might benefit from them. This speech illustrates that some groups, now this is what I love, such as the Indian National Congress, responded to colonialism by arguing that various social groups in colonial India should be unified within a single nation. Okay. Again, they're taking what's being written in an explained question and pulling from this that certainly this group here is going to argue that India should be unified, right, within a single nation. The passage illustrates, and that's fine, guys, you don't have to write the author's name out, that European colonialism led to divisions within and between ethnic and religious groups, right? So I would comma that, right? For example, right, Hindus and Muslims in India, right, comma, that supported or opposed European, say, British rule, right? Because what you're doing with this is you are, again, broadly trying to answer how the passage is a specific example of a broader response. Hopefully that makes sense. His speech illustrates that a minority religious or ethnic group within colonial societies like India often supported colonial rule to protect them against majority groups. This one, it ties in there. As I flip to the next screen, I want to remind you guys that these are the responses that come directly from the College Board, so that sometimes they're a little fancier than maybe the way you would write, okay? Incorrect responses, I think I went a little too far tonight. Now look at the mistakes people are making. So this is good. The passage illustrates the response to British colonialism because it speaks about the English Congress. Yeah, you need to be careful. Okay, you cannot possibly understand the views of inhabitants, as many are Muslim and Hindi, right? So here's what I'm going to tell you. I can live with that mistake. That could be, right? If this was, I know you guys did this timed, right? Up to this point, if you said English Congress and you just, as many of the inhabitants are Muslim, I could be good and say, oh, you just made a simple mistake. It's not going to take away from the answer, but now you say Hindi, right? It also speaks of how there are British are there, and if they leave, one of the religious groups would end up on top to rule. This gets you a little closer. There's a moment where I feel like if you got rid of a couple of words here and replace them, general words, and replace them with something specific, I could see scoring the point. I could see just going like this. All right, that's mostly misunderstanding. And if we got to this, it also speaks of how the British are in control of India, and if they leave, right, the Hindus would wind up on top to can rule over the minority group like Muslims. It's close. I just don't think it passes. It passes the finish line. And I think you have the idea, this student has the idea. I just think that, you know, in this case, because it's my class, I expect you to do better than that, right? The passage brings up guns and cannon from the Americas. All right, folks. It helps if we read carefully, okay? It has nothing to do with America. Explain one way, explain how and why, in which the circumstances of the speech might have affected the author's argument in the passage, right? This is a context question. What is going on in the world at this time? What are the broader patterns of Indian history that are going on that might inform us? Again, this is not a right and wrong mathematical 2 + 2 = 4 question. This is, are you taking a broader historical force and applying it to this question, right? So I mentioned the date, right? This is often called the Indian Revolt of 1857 or the Sepoy Mutiny. If you got the idea, right, that this speech was delivered after the British East India Company lost control of India, and the British government assumed direct control, right? It's explained, so you have to explain how it or why it might have affected the author's passage, right? By saying that it might have fostered divisions or encouraged dissent between those who opposed and supported British rule. That would get you there. His speech was given to a Muslim community, which would explain why he argues against the goals of the mostly Hindu Indian National Congress. A lot of you got in and around this, but you're not explaining why it might have affected the author's argument, right? The broader context is, right, is that the Indian National Congress is predominantly Hindu. He has argued to a Muslim community, right? And part of this might contribute to why he is arguing against the goals. You can't say things that won't get the responses that won't get the credit is, right, he's a Muslim and he's not going to like these things, right? You need to be more specific. A couple of examples of the circumstances of speech, which were the English colonialism of India might affect the author's argument because he could be fighting to get the English out of India, or he could fight that if the English leave, their government would not be stable. Okay, Again, these are people who are so close that they would just tweak what they're doing. Right? Number one, he is not necessarily fighting to get the English out of India. Right? If somebody, but I can ignore something that's wrong, or I can get to here. I need more specificity, right? This argument, if that second part looked more like that, it would get you there, right? But you need to be using those vocabulary terms that are in the reading, the Indian National Congress, right? You need to be demonstrating that you know stuff. As a Muslim educator and political reformer, the author's position is one of power. All right, so already kind of the problem with this is that you're trying to do point of view of the author. That's not what the question is asking. It's asking for circumstances or context, right? The author's position is one of high power and would benefit from the power of imperialism biasing him towards it. Okay, let's go back to the question. How does it affect his argument? You are not telling me, even if this is a point of view, how it is affecting the argument he's making, right? Get into this, right? It's affecting the argument he's making because as a Muslim, right, talking to other Muslims, he's going to argue against the goals of the Indian National Congress, which is Hindu and a different religion. Lastly, explain one way in which the author's point of view is significant or important for illustrating how European ideologies influence development of Indian society. We've got a lot going on in this question, right? We've got to take a look at the author's point of view. Why is it important for showing how European ideologies, isms, right, impact Indian society? Right? European ideas are going to impact all of the territories that they take over during imperialism. Okay? But you have to identify a specific ideology. Remember that point of view generally is core and PAG that I use: class, occupation, religion, nationality, political affiliation, ethnicity, gender. So if we look, right, his argument is significant because it illustrates the spread of nationalism. Okay, and you're going to see nationalism throughout all of these. That's really what they're focused on. Okay, it illustrates the spread of nationalism from Europe. Well, how? Right? And demonstrates that the development of nationalist movements in India exposed divisions. Right? So it's identifying the European ideology, nationalism, and kind of telling me how it influenced or affected or changed. One could argue change. Change is the argument here, the thinking skill. Illustrates that European ideologies such as democracy certainly began influencing political thought in India in the 19th century. Gosh, I'd love to see more there, but the vocabulary term is democracy, right? I'd love for somebody to talk a little bit more about, the democratic process. It is completely evident as I go back a few screens, right, that not only is the concept of democracy, right, impacting the Indian National Congress, but it is very subtly being argued that Khan understands democracy, and one of the components of democracy is the idea that you have majority rule with the protection of minority rights, right? And easily we can argue that democracy is there. I'm going to jump in because the other two talk about nationalism again. I also want to point out in this is that if you talked about the Enlightenment, right, and they're using this term, where did it go? Experiment to do, especially for the Muslims, that all national Congress wants to make dangers. Where'd the word equally go? There it goes. That various religions, castes, and ethnic groups of India can all be treated alike, and all of them belong to the same nation. Well, one can make the argument, and I saw a couple of kids get the points for this, as you talk about the ideas of natural rights or the Enlightenment government ideas of a social contract, or just the idea that everybody is equal under the law. That is certainly inferred, right? And again, guys, we are not seeing lengthy quotes or quotes at all. Okay. these correct answers go on. You can read them and pause this and read them on your own here. The problem with this one, there is no ideology. Okay, you're not answering the question. Easily, we can argue that imperialism is an ideology of the West. The problem is, with this response is, it doesn't answer the question. Khan is not necessarily embracing the ideas of imperialism. Go back to this, how it influenced the development of Indian society, right? He is in favor of imperialism. I don't know. I don't think he is necessarily in favor of imperialism. I would argue he's in favor of keeping the British there for now, because he doesn't trust the Hindu majority. This shows that. Okay, great job, right? You know how much I love that little phrase. This shows that. It didn't explain. That's perfect, right? However, it goes off the deep end here. Europeans heavily influenced the Indian population to become more imperialistic by exposing them to European ideology. The problem with this is it's just not true, right? It didn't lead to the Indians going out and while they're being run by the British to control other countries. Partly one could make the argument if this was a question on Japan, right? That might work, right? In the idea, the European ideology, right? Of imperialism certainly impacted Japan, and then they modeled that behavior, but this question is not about Japan. Okay? So hopefully I did a decent job of explaining this to you. Hopefully this helped. You know how to get a hold of me with questions or what have you. If you do not, if you want to ask about your own particular short answer question or the like. All right.